Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on from where you join us. My name is Andrea Filippi, and I work as a program and advocacy officer at Peace Women across the globe. I'm really so happy to be here with you and see so many people from all over the world who are participating today. I want to thank all of you, both the speakers and the attendees, very much for being here today for today's event with the title Centering Care in Women, Peace and Security. An interesting and rich program awaits us with two parts. First, we will have the privilege to listen to the keynote lecture by Ms. Leymah Gbowee. A warm welcome from all of us. This will be followed by further inputs by Anna Leising, Barbara Detwiller-Scheuer and Talia Wohl. After a short break, there will be further inputs by Leandra Baez, Florence Mikali, Elvira Vigas and Theodora Lecci. Both input blocks will each be followed by discussion. I will now hand over to Florina. Thank you very much. I wish all of us a very interesting and rich afternoon.
Good afternoon and a very, very warm welcome to the conference on Centering Care and Women, Peace and Security also from my side. I look very much forward to discussing with you in this virtual conference how care relates to women's participation and peace building. My name is Florina Derons. I'm the director of Peace Women across the globe. So I'm joining from Bern, Switzerland. With my colleagues from COF and CFD, I will lead you through this afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are. And now directly lead over to introducing Ms. Lima Bowie, a task that I'm very happy to do. 2011 Nobel Peace Laureate Leymah Gbowee is a Liberian peace activist, a trained social worker, and a women's rights advocate. She currently serves as Executive Director of the Women, Peace and Security Program at Columbia University's Earth Institute and is the founder and current president of the Bowie Peace Foundation Africa. Furthermore, Ms. Leymah Gbowee is the founding head of the Liberia Reconciliation Initiative, co-founder of Women, Peace and Security Network Africa, and founding member of the West Africa Network for Peace Building. Ms. Gbowie's leadership of the Women of Liberia Mass Action for Peace, which brought together Christian and Muslim women in a non-violent movement that played a pivotal role in ending Liberia's civil war in 2003, is chronicled in her memoir, Mighty Be Our Powers, and in the award-winning documentary, Pray the Devil Back to Hell. Ms. Leymah Gbowee holds a Master in Conflict Transformation and an Honorary Doctor of Law. Ms. Leymah Gbowee, I'm so happy you accepted our invitation and are here with us today.
Thank you so much. Good morning, ladies. I'm really happy to be here with you all today. I want to extend my thanks to the group, to all of you wonderful women still in the fight for peace and security and justice in our world. Today's conference is basically centering care around WPS. Before I even go further into our conversation, I want to lay the premise of peace. Because most often when people begin to talk about the agenda for peace, it's hinged on that mindset of peace is the absence of war. And I think it's time for us to move away from that definition of peace if we must even begin to include the invisibilized individuals who help make peace and security a reality. And we will also talk deeper about that. Peace, in my opinion, is not just the absence of war. Peace is the presence of conditions that dignifies all of us. So those conditions are our basic human security needs. And most times you tend to agree or disagree with me, the absence of those conditions are primarily key reasons why nations go to war. When a group of people feel marginalized, when they feel disrespected, when they feel their rights are not taken into consideration, when they cannot find food, health care, shelter for they and their children, then they begin to agitate and then we get into serious problems. So peace is not just the absence of war. Peace is the creation of all of those conditions that dignifies you and I, or that dignifies one's life. So if we have this background as our guiding principle, then the question now, or the thing now is, how do we center care around WPS? When I joined the women's movement in 2000, or from 98 when I started my work, it became very evident to me that it was impossible to do this kind of work without a support system. It is impossible to be an activist. It is impossible to be a caregiver if you do not have a community of people working with you. And I say this because it's a lived experience or lived experience. When I started at the community level, this was 1993. I had 2 kids in that period. My son was a year old when I had my daughter in April. So these children had very short space in between them. But I had delved into being a community activist, working around domestic violence, and trying to encourage young girls to go to school. Then in 2003, take it all the way, I already had 4 children, and the war was raging. My children were out of Liberia. They were in a different part of Africa. I'm in Liberia protesting. It was possible for me to do the kind of work that I was doing because of my siblings, my mother, and all of those in my community that made it easy for me. But before we go into the whole conversation about the invisibilized people, let's talk about us activists centering care in our own lives. The way I describe us as activists doing the work that we do is we are sponges. Just close your eyes and imagine you're standing in front of your kitchen sink. Each and every one of us have sponges in our kitchen. We use it all to mop out stuff. Whether we like it or not, as activists, we're trying to map out all of the dirt that our societies have created. And in this situation, we are the sponges. We are the one mapping out our bodies. We take the emotions, we take all the feelings, we take everything along with the hard work that we do. There's absolutely no way that you can separate your personal from the political. Because when you go into that space, you take all of those things, you bring them home, even though we would like to believe that we leave it in the field or we leave it in the office, but part of it come home. Because even as you live in it, if you encounter, say for example, a domestic situation, you go home and you hug your child, or you hug your spouse, or you hug that person who is your support system, you are hugging them to take away some of the feelings that you brought back with you. In order for us to be effective in the work that we do, we need to, at different points in time, pull out and squeeze out the sponge. Close your eyes and imagine that as a sponge, you are cleaning something, you're cleaning stuff, you're cleaning your kitchen table, you're cleaning your sink, or you're cleaning your something. That sponge will get to the point where it is unable to clean anything when it's dripping. And dripping sponges are of no use to you. You are only able to continue cleaning if you squeeze or wring out the dirt from that sponge. As activists, if we must center care in the work that we do, there will always be wars. There will always be issues that challenges our feministic principles. There will always be the fight for our bodily integrity and autonomy. All of these things, as long as we walk the face of the earth, there will always be reason for us to do the work that we do. We must be able to center the care of ourselves, because a leaking sponge, so when you dip that sponge for so long and you lift it up, it begins to drip. I wish I was in the room with you all to show you. Tick, tick, tick. In that process, you cannot give, you cannot work, you cannot do. So you have to wring out. The way I describe it, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, if we have any here, is that you cannot give what you don't have. Activism requires of us that we are able to do our work efficiently and effectively. If we're burned out, if we're break down, we cannot do that. Yesterday, I had the privilege of being on a call. And one of the first things that people were talking about on that call was our mental health. And in this period of all of the work that we're doing, COVID has come and exacerbated everything. So we have to really, really, really begin to think, if I must work on Congo, if I must work on Afghanistan, if I must work on Syria and Yemen, I must be in the best state of health mentally to be able to do those things. You see, when the UN adopted the resolution 1325, they didn't just do it out of the clear blue sky. It was years of us agitating and advocating for women's involvement, women's participation in peace and security processes. So we got it. Is it the way we want to see it? My answer is a resounding no. The UN Security Council Resolution 1325, 25 years later or more, is still like a baby that is needing milk. 1325 has not gotten to the point where we can say it is efficiently and effectively being rolled out. We're all sitting and watching Afghanistan. Trust me, if there is a process of peace table, we will have to take a tooth out to get women involvement as part of it, as if there is no 1325. So whilst we do this very important work, it is important for us to center our own care in all of this. And I'm very happy that you all choose this particular topic as part of it. The second thing that I want to talk about is, as we do this work, we gain a lot of notoriety. Everyone knows me. Everyone knows you. Everyone knows Barbara. Everyone knows Andrea. All of us, in some way, people know us based on the work that we're doing. What they don't know are those people who are behind us supporting the work. And some of those people are either in our offices or in our homes. In my own life, it was my mother and my sisters. When I stood on that dais in December of 2011 to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, it was not my mother. My sister had been dead for several years. But those were the people who stood there. So how do we create a situation, a platform, especially for those women in the communities who are doing WPS work, but indirectly, so that they are recognized and in some cases compensated for their work? The first thing that we need to do is to begin to highlight their roles. You cannot continue to say, I did this. You find yourself in a circle, even in a network of women peace builders. It takes a group of individuals to get you to where you need to get to. So it is in that you have to highlight the role of women. People often ask me where I get my strength from to do the work that I do. My response is, and is really, really a legitimate response, I get my strength from those women at the community level, the invisible peace builders that may never get on a Zoom call with some of you, that may never get on a flight to go to New York, that may never come to Oslo or Stockholm or all of these places. But in these communities, these are the women who are waking up every morning, regardless of recognition, regardless of notoriety, regardless of a budget, regardless of funding. They are doing the WPS work because their daily existence is hinged on those people, on the work that they do. So for me, every time I step out, I tell myself I do not represent just me. I represent a whole bunch of those women who continues to do the kind of work that they're doing without expecting anything in return. But my role is to highlight them. Recently, there is a group that asked me to nominate some women for a prize. Equivalent to the Nobel is about $1 million. If you Google some of the names that I have on that list, you won't find it because they are not on the internet like that. But those are women who have consistently fought rape in their communities. Those are women who have consistently been the support for those of us who are the visible activists. Do we take away from them? Again, I center the definition of peace on not just the absence of war, the presence of conditions that dignifies our life. And so if we must create conditions that dignifies our life, we must also be creating conditions that recognize those who are unseen in some of these processes. So as we continue the conversation about centering care around the PS, let us not forget the first thing is to think about our own care. One of the conscious decisions that I made during the COVID was that every week I would take one day off. Every week I take a day off. And trust me, I take it off to do crazy stuff. Because again, there will always be wars. There will always be reason we need to agitate and advocate. Is it our climate crisis? Is it the increasing domestic situation or women killings or the rape and abuse that we see? There will always be those things. But my mother always told us that a dead hero is no hero. So that first thing for me is to take care one day off. And what do I do on those days? It's not necessarily lazing around, but I do those things that are satisfactory to me. I go out, I visit old people. Sometimes I buy grocery, take to them. Sometimes I take my notebook, I write. Sometimes I go to where women are doing small scale businesses and just sit and listen to their stories, because it is all also a part of the work that we're doing. The second thing is to highlight all of those people that support the work that we do. I can tell you all that the times that we live in are calling for us to increase our advocacy. The times that we live in are calling for us to speak out against the ills in our different societies. The times that we live in are calling for us to transform the narrative from of peace just being the absence of war into peace being about homelessness, peace being about gender-based violence, peace being about FGM, peace being about all of these different things. Yesterday, I heard a very interesting phrase in a meeting that I was in: terrorism against women. And I tried to think about it for a long time. And some of the things that I wrote down as I tried to think about the terrorism against women, which I intend to really push for a long time, talk about it, is that when you talk about terrorism against women, you are talking about rape being negotiated by people who did not go through the process. You're talking about family planning being discussed by men who have never had their periods. You're talking about women suffering from all of the different things. And the reason why I'm listing all of these things that happen to women is because these are things that the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 are asking us to prevent. These are the kind of things that 1325 is asking us to work on. The one thing that I need to push and that we need to push is about participation. 1325 has laid out for us that there is a need for us to participate in different things. Women in your part of the world has done a very good job around the whole concept of 1325, around the work relating to 1325. Your national action plans have been so great that you're able to get your national governments to give budgets, to do stuff, to do these things that you need to do. But what the times are calling for, and there is no space in this world that any of us can say has achieved what 1325 is calling us to do. There is no place in this world that can say that we've achieved full participation, that we've been able to prevent some of the crises that our worlds people in the world are facing. We've been able to push the feminist principles the way we want to do them. Nowhere. We must not relax. I think one of the greatest disservice we do to ourselves as women is we celebrate too early, too soon. We had 1325, we've been celebrating for 25 years. The times that we've put into celebrating 5th anniversary, 10th anniversary, 15th anniversary, 20th anniversary, and 25th anniversary could have been taken to do some of the things that we need to do. Our world is calling for all of us to continue to do the work that we need to do. But we cannot do those things if we do not take care of ourselves, if we do not have a gender on the table that is about us. I'll tell you all a quick story and then I'll end. Several years ago, we went to protest. And as we protested, we came back home. I was very happy because it was an exhausting day. Protesting peace, dealing with all of the issues that women are dealing with, somehow takes away from you. As soon as I came home, about to take off my clothes to relax, some of the women from the movement came and said one of our sisters had been in prison. So we went to the police station. The situation was not related to anything. She didn't have money to pay her rent. This woman had sacrificed her life to do peace work and was not working, so she had gone delayed on her rent. The landlord was a powerful person. He decided to take her to jail. By law, she should not have been in prison. But because she was poor and an activist, she was put in prison. So we got to the prison. It's after 6. Every court is closed. And so a group of us decide, what do we do? One of the police officers said, if you leave this woman here by herself tonight, the possibility of her being raped is very high. She was not in the ranks and the hierarchy of our movement. This was just an ordinary grassroots local activist who, again, my inspiration are from those people. The ones who are in the group are the ones who are also invisibilized. So we made a decision. I made a decision that we'll sleep in prison with her. And so we sat in the corridors of the prison, and the prison, this is like a small jail place, a small police station, maybe the size of a 20-foot container. And so we're about 25 women were cramped in there with the police officers. By nightfall, they decide that it was only the humanitarian thing was to bring her out of the jail cell and let her sit with us. So we sat up all night in that cramped up space. By morning, some people went to buy toothbrushes. We stayed there. We used water to brush our teeth. The court was just above where the prison was. When the court opened, we went and sat in there, all of us. In those moments, it was not just about freeing a sister, but it was about advocating for a system that would dignify the life of any other poor person. We wrote a petition to the then president about the kangaroo courts that we had in Liberia. That day, because of that case, today, those kangaroo courts have been abolished in our society. Because those kangaroo courts were the courts that were used to mistreat, abuse, and treat women anyhow. Why am I telling you this story? Activists are not superheroes. Each and every one of you on this call are humans. You have emotions, you have feelings, and you have needs. And one of the core need of every activist I've learned over 28 years in this field is the need for care, the need for support, the need for individuals to stand with you even as you stand up and speak out for peace. As we celebrate the International Day of Peace, my charge to all of us is that even as we fight for peace, which is not the absence, just the absence of war, but that peace that supports the rights of women, that peace that supports advocating, that peace that dignifies each and every one of us, let us not forget ourselves. Let us take care of ourselves, because I've seen so many older activists die from burnout. Let us remember that as we write the narrative of our exploits and the wonderful things we've done, let us even include the names of those nannies who took care of our children, because it is in their service that we are able to do what we do. Finally, as we celebrate the International Day of Peace, let us not forget that there will be and there will continue to be many women who we may not see or we may not interact with. But there are those women out there who wake up every morning and make peace a possibility in their community because of their service. Happy International Day of Peace, my sister. The struggle continues, the work is hard, but we can never give up because this is the charge that we all have. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ms. Lima Bowie, for all these words of strength, encouraging words to not forget ourselves, to look after each other, we all being activists, to be together, stand together in those very difficult times. So
Thank you all so much. Happy International Day of Peace, my sisters, my brothers. Let's keep the charge. Let's keep the fight because the world will not let us rest. Thank you all. Have a good and a godly or blessed day. Bye, everyone.
let us continue after this very, very impressive keynote speech that I assume touched us all very much. And with this, I'm happy to hand over to you, Anna Leising, Head of COF at Swiss Peace. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Florina. Welcome. Hi, everyone, also from my side. I am humbled, I'm honored, and I'm proud to open this conference and to provide that brief introduction into the project that culminates in today's event. My name is Anna Leising. I'm the head of the policy and platform team at Swiss Peace. And in this capacity, I'm in charge of the strategic lead of the COF platform, a platform that brings together almost 50 Swiss-based NGOs and civil society organizations, as well as 2 Swiss state institutions, the Peace and Human Rights Division and the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation, present here today with us. And I said I'm proud because this event is the result of a long-standing, a dedicated and a fruitful collaboration, not only between the 3 main organizers of the conference, but also among a broad and diverse spectrum of civil society organizations in Switzerland and abroad, the Swiss administration, interstate parliamentarians, feminist researchers and practitioners, and so on and so forth. It is the result of a great number of people who care about peace, justice, women's rights, gender equality, and who decided to invest their time and resources into this endeavor. And I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to all of these people, to all of you. But let me take us a few steps back to the earlier stages of this collaboration to give you a bit of a background to today's event. I would like us to jump ahead to the year 2016, when the Civil Society Alternative Report, Women, Peace and Security Reloaded, was published. The report analyzes and comments on Switzerland's implementation of the first 3 NAPs from a civil society perspective. It critically discusses the strength, the gaps, and the potential of the Swiss engagement on WPS. Among others, it highlights 2 thematic areas that need further analysis and critical engagement. A, the implications of the Preventing Violent Extremism agenda on women, peace and security. And B, the socio-economic conditions for women's participation in peace processes and politics more broadly. It also highlights the crucial connections between WPS and other policy frameworks, such as CEDAW or the Agenda 2030 on Sustainable Development. And it calls for a stronger emphasis on the domestic implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325. In its outlook, it states, I cite, "To strike out in new directions, we need to open our minds, to extend our own practice, our instruments and methods, and a readiness to promote new networks and forms of cooperation." And this is where we are. This is what we aim for with that project that we're talking about today. It is called the Civil Society's Contribution to the 4th Swiss National Action Plan 1325, and it is co-financed by the Peace and Human Rights Division, the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation, and the 3 implementing organizations, CFD, Peace Women Across the Globe, and COF. For the first time, Swiss civil society organizations are part of the implementation of the Swiss NAP, with the overall objective of increasing the relevance and the visibility of Resolution 1325. When saying relevance, we refer to the observation that there is a gap between the everyday realities and experiences of civil society organizations and the debates and measures at the policy level. When saying visibility, we point to the lack of awareness about the women, peace and security agenda in Swiss politics and the broader public. So in the past 3 years, we collected, analyzed and discussed the expertise, the experiences, the perspectives of civil society organizations related to the 2 thematic foci mentioned before. A, the implications of connecting the WPS agenda to the so-called prevention of violent extremism, and B, the socioeconomic conditions for women's participation, which is the question that frames today's event. Based on the findings, we further engage at 3 levels. First, the findings and recommendations are fed into a continuous policy dialogue with Swiss state institutions related to the NAP to ensure that these perspectives are considered both in the implementation of the current NAP, in the design of the next one, and ideally even beyond in other policy frameworks such as CEDAW, the Swiss Strategy for Sustainable Development, or the Federal Council's report on Swiss security policy. The second level of engagement is the media and the broader public. A highlight in this regard was the conference that concluded the first phase of the project in 2019. It was titled Reclaim Prevention, and it brought together civil society representatives from Switzerland and abroad, representatives of Swiss state institutions such as the FDFA, the Ministry of Defense, or the State Secretariat on Migration, as well as interested parliamentarians. We discussed the implications of connecting the PVE and WPS agendas, and the conference provided fascinating insights into the overall question of how to navigate this fine line between, on the one hand, having a voice in highly relevant debates about security and violence prevention, and on the other side, feeding into militarized and hard security responses to violence, which risk to essentialize women and instrumentalize women's rights on behalf of state security. Anyone interested in reading more about these findings and recommendations, please have a look at the report Women, Peace and Security and the Prevention of Violence, or the corresponding policy brief, which you can find on our website and in the chat. Thank you. The third level of engagement is the Swiss National Parliament. To raise awareness about WPS in Swiss politics, we work with so-called parliamentary ambassadors. They promote the debate on WPS issues through parliamentary initiatives, of which we had 5 until today. These initiatives tackle specific aspects of the WPS agenda in the Swiss Parliament. And just yesterday, we distributed our very beautiful leaflet, No Care, No Peace, to parliamentarians in front of the Federal Palace, and we gathered with them for a picture in order to visualize the political support for the WPS agenda and for women's rights and gender equality in general. So this brings us to today, and I am very much looking forward to hearing all the different reflections and perspectives from the speakers from the FDFA and civil society, to hear their reflections about how care is related to women's participation in the realm of peace and security, and what this means in terms of the domestic implementation of Resolution 1325 in Switzerland. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I hand back to Florina. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Anna, analyzing, for giving us an introduction to the overall project. And by this, laying the ground and framing the following inputs of the conference that we will hear today and the discussions we have. And with this, I pass over to introducing Barbara Detwiller-Scheuer to you. Ms. Detwiller-Scheuer talks about the perspectives of the Swiss Development Cooperation Agency, SDC. She is head of the multilateral division at SDC's Humanitarian Aid Department. Barbara Detwiller-Scheuer has more than 25 years of progressive and senior level experience in the field of development cooperation and humanitarian aid in SDC headquarters and in different fragile contexts. She has served as Director of Cooperation at the Swiss embassies in Sarajevo and in Tunis, responsible for steering and implementing the Swiss cooperation program in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Tunisia. Ms. Detwiller-Scheuer, I'm so happy you accepted our invitation. Thank you for being with us today, and I'm happy to give you the floor.
Thank you, Florina. Thank you very much. I'm also very happy to be with you here. It's really a great honor to be with all of you and to be able to share with you some experiences of the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. And I really would like to thank our partners from the organizing civil society to give us this opportunity to speak. I myself am not an expert on the women, peace and security agenda, but pushing forward gender equality, promoting the participation of women in decision-making and fighting gender stereotypes has been part of my professional life since more than 25 years. In Palestine, for example, in Tunisia and in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where I have lived and worked during the past 5 years. I'm personally strongly convinced that the society can only advance in peace if women and men, boys and girls are treated with equality and mutual respect in the society. Let me start with some reflections about our global engagement for realizing the women, peace and security agenda. The Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation is convinced that women are important agents when it comes to inclusive and peaceful development. This with obvious gains for the economy, for public policy and the provision of essential services. We therefore promote women's empowerment, participation and leadership in many spheres of life. This contributes to the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, sometimes with a direct and explicit link, sometimes more indirectly. We thereby align our actions with the key priorities of Switzerland's 4th National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. With our strong and year-long support to local governance and citizens' participation, we aim at an inclusive contribution of all citizens to setting priorities and overlooking the management of public resources and services. We try to promote a collaborative problem-solving approach to address issues of public concern. This is not only crucial in preventing, but also transforming violent conflicts. Thereby, we work to enhance women's participation and leadership. For example, in Nepal, where social exclusion and discrimination was a root cause of a year-long violent conflict. In Nepal, SDC supports projects in which women of all groups are empowered to become leaders in local governance and to contribute to a more inclusive state-building process. Women participate in training and coaching sessions, they become more self-confident, and they are encouraged to run for elections and performing their duty once they are in office. This is not so easy, because women running for elections are often under huge pressure from the society, mostly from their immediate environment. Therefore, it is also crucial to work with male community leaders and male household leaders and to bring them on board. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have chosen to work with boys and young men first, because it is proven that if you want to reach gender equality and the empowerment of women, if you want to address the root causes of gender-based violence and other forms of violent behavior in young people, you also have to engage young men and boys as agents of change. Eradicating harmful gender stereotypes, gender cliches, and their associated behaviors is a difficult task, because social norms and social behaviors are not changing overnight. The Young Men Initiative in Bosnia and Herzegovina teaches young men life skills that help them to recognize the risk they may face during their adolescence, to understand diversity and to become open members of the society. I witnessed myself how the participants of the Young Men Initiative have changed. They themselves started to fight publicly gender-based disadvantages and discrimination, and they have now a positive attitude towards women as strong, successful leaders. They understand that women have an important role to play in community development, but also in strengthening a society's resilience to crisis. And this is still crucial in Bosnia and Herzegovina, even 25 years after the war. A good example of women being actively involved in conflict resolution, but also in negotiation and decision-making on peace and security, including in mediation efforts, is happening in Mali. This project, supported by SDC, aims at mobilizing women as peacemakers, both locally and nationally. Accordingly, their priorities are taken into account and their capacities are strengthened. Women are also better protected against human rights violations, including sexual and gender-based violence and abuse during and after the conflict, as well as in peacetime. Mali is therefore a good example for how we support the implementation of the National Action Plan 1325. However, there is another obstacle women face if they want to become leaders and promoters of peace and security. It is their responsibility for domestic and care work, today's central topic. It eats much, very much of their time. It does not let them space to do something else and is not sufficiently recognized and remunerated. COVID-19 crisis has made this particularly visible once again. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, the closure of schools and the fact that elderly people above 65 were not allowed to leave their home put additional pressure on women who did 3 times as much unpaid care work as men, even before the pandemic. At SDC, we are challenged to step up our efforts to address this more systematically in conflict-affected and non-conflict affected regions. For example, through improvements in the area of childcare and social care. In Kyrgyzstan, we supported state care centers for preschool children, which has decreased unpaid care tasks and allowed women to use their time otherwise. In Moldova, SDC supports civil society organizations which push for better conditions for childcare leave in legislation. Other initiatives, and coming back to my favorite topic, target male household members, value women's active roles, recognize their workload, and take on a more equal share of the housework. In Bangladesh, dialogue among married couples is organized to valorize women's important contribution in the farming business and stimulate greater support by their husbands in domestic tasks. Finally, we contribute to improve labor and protection conditions for migrant women working in the care economy. We promote better employment contracts and support the access of domestic workers to remittances and financial services. The women also acquire skills to improve their autonomy, self-esteem, and social standing. With these selected examples, I tried to explain how we support the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. We are committed to stay engaged and are highly motivated to increase our efforts in this important field. We want to continue learning together and further improving in what we do. This is our joint responsibility. Therefore, I'm looking forward to hear what the findings of the study tell us and what other valuable participants can share from their professional and personal experience. Thank you very much. Merci vielmals.
Our joint responsibility. Thank you so much, Barbara Dettel-Scheuer, for sharing the examples how STC implements the Women, Peace and Security agenda and to share with us the perspectives STC has on this joint project. Happy to introduce the next speaker to you, Talia Wohl, from the Swiss Peace and Human Rights Division, PHRD. The responsibility for implementing the Swiss National Action Plan 1325 on Women, Peace and Security lies within an interdepartmental working group with members of different departments such as gender equality, defense, or justice. Talia Wohl, who is Senior Advisor for Women, Peace and Security at PHRD. So Talia Wohl manages this working group to implement all Swiss measures on women, peace and security. Talia Wohl has long time experience in the topic as well, like Barbara Dettel-Scheuer. She worked for the OSCE mediation support team and co-authored a toolkit on inclusion of women in peace processes. And furthermore, prior to OSCE, Talia Wohl managed the FDFA Western Balkan program. From 2006 to 2012 in Kosovo, she worked, among others, for the International Civilian Office.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, colleagues. It's really a great pleasure for me to participate in this conference today. Swiss civil society is a strong partner in the implementation of our National Action Plan on Resolution 1325. For us in the administration, this cooperation enables us to listen to civil society's voice and also to learn from experiences on the ground. Today's conference is also taking place at a timely moment. Switzerland is implementing currently its fourth National Action Plan until the end of 2022. As we plan for our engagement on women, peace and security beyond this date, we welcome the opportunity to critically reflect on our work. Yet, as we consider our future plans and policies, we are also acutely aware that right now we're not where we're supposed to be. Over the years, it has proven challenging to embed the women, peace and security agenda in a system that was not built with gender equality in its design. And we heard it before, the COVID-19 pandemic in particular brought the deficiencies to the forefront. Data published at the end of last year by UN Women showed that the amount of time women spend doing unpaid care work has increased significantly, and more women than men were dropping out of paid work. And according to a 2021 report of the World Economic Forum, the impact of the pandemic is such that closing the global gender gap has increased by a generation from 99 years to 136 years. For us, this is another stark warning to keep up our efforts and not to let the progress made in the past 2 decades unravel. Switzerland is convinced that gender equality is an integral part of peace and security. This has been translated into a clear strategic framework. In 2017, the FDFA launched a strategy on gender equality and women's rights. This is a tool that the FDFA has at its disposal to systematically work in 4 thematic fields. These encompass the economic empowerment and and political participation of women, protection against gender-based violence, and the advancement of rights in the field of sexual and reproductive health. It is important that our foreign policy engagement in this area is coherent with national aspirations. We have many gaps at the national level, and we know that we need to do better. For example, when it comes to domestic violence or the gender pay gap. Therefore, the Federal Council adopted this year the National Gender Equality Strategy 2030. The strategy's core elements are congruent with our foreign policy. So the National Action Plan 1325 is part of this strategic framework that I've just delineated. The first of its 5 objectives focuses on the effective involvement of women in conflict prevention. It underlines the link between political and socioeconomic conditions with a focus on care work and the effective participation of women in political and in peace processes. The realization of these objectives implies a division of work between all concerned actors. We have just heard about the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation's extensive and global engagement in this thematic area. The investigation on the link between care and women, peace and security, of which we will hear more shortly, is part of civil society's contribution to the implementation of this goal. We at the Peace and Human Rights Division work on conflict prevention through the lens of human security. The link is an obvious one. Where conflicts are prevented or resolved without violence, life and dignity, and without fear or want, that is, human security, becomes possible. In this respect, our engagement in conflict prevention is successful where it is adapted to the local context, where the root causes of possible violent conflicts are analyzed in a gender-sensitive way, and where we succeed in linking the work done locally with multilateral engagement. Allow me to expand on these 3 elements and how they relate to women's participation in conflict prevention. Firstly, the civil society and women-led organizations are often engaged in local humanitarian responses, conflict prevention and resolution long before official processes are initiated. And we need to harness such critical contributions. For this purpose, we engage with civil society organizations to support inclusive dialogue formats that strengthen women's participation in conflict transformation processes. For example, we partner with peace women across the globe and their Women's Peace Tables initiatives in the Philippines, Nepal, and Colombia. In Lebanon, Switzerland initiated jointly with partners an inclusive and intersectional dialogue process that brings together women from different political parties and women active in the protest movements. With the aim to build trust, relationships, and networks, this process builds spaces within the current political system for new actors and new ways of engagement. It produces ideas and proposals to bridge the political divide and to overcome the socioeconomic crisis. Secondly, we are convinced that gender-sensitive analysis is key to women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in the prevention and in peace process. We need to be guided by such analysis to determine the root causes, to know which actors to engage with, and which topics to discuss. It is simply not possible to design inclusive peace processes if the analysis is gender blind. But one of the challenges here is that one of the challenges that needs to be tackled is the lack of availability of gender disaggregated data. And lastly, the transfer of experiences by the civil society at the local level to the level of multilateral politics and back remains a challenge. There is still a need to strengthen the link between multilateral instruments and the women, peace and security agenda. Next year, Switzerland will co-chair the Women, Peace and Security Focal Points Network together with South Africa. The network consists of over 80 states and 7 regional and international organizations. It is a forum that embraces an inclusive approach and works with civil society as it aims to strengthen the implementation of the agenda. The network can thus be seen as a vehicle with which Switzerland can further advance topics in the WPS agenda, which are important to us and where we can also bring an added value. But for now, I'm looking forward to hear about the results of the study and to learn from the experiences in this virtual room we have here today. Thank you.
Thank you for your words, for your perspectives of PHRD. I'm happy to launch our publication. Anna mentioned it before already. There it is. No Care, No Peace, Contributions from Civil Society on Switzerland's Implementation of the UN Women, Peace and Security Agenda.
I'm really happy to continue with the second part of our conference now and delve more into today's subject. We will go on with input by Leandra Bias, who is the project coordinator of the project this conference results from. She will now present the results from our work of the last 1.5 years on how care is related to women's participation in peacebuilding and security. Leandra Bias is gender advisor and senior researcher at Swiss Peace and COF, the Swiss platform for peacebuilding. As I already said, she coordinates the project Civil Society's Contribution to the Implementation of the Swiss National Action Plan on 1325, which is the reason why we gather here today. In her position, she works on the WPS agenda with a strong focus on sexualized and gender-based violence, care, and masculinities. She recently finished her PhD in politics at Oxford, focusing on the rise of authoritarianism and the gender backlash it comes with. Leandra, I'm really happy you're presenting the results, and I'm giving the floor to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Andrea, and it's really been a pleasure to coordinate this project over the past 18 months with all of you. So my gratitude also goes to you, even if I get more time to speak in terms of making the invisible visible. And so before I begin, sharing immediately, these are the results, these are our recommendations, I'd like to take a moment and remind us all of the political landscape in which this project really takes place. You've heard a lot of by whom it is financed and what we are supposed to do, but let's take a closer look because I think it's very important to remind ourselves of that. So what does Switzerland's implementation of the WPS agenda actually look like, and what is our task in it? This is the current National Action Plan. It's been extended, if we are informed correctly, until 2023. And in it, we are officially tackled to work under the main goal of conflict prevention, which through the involvement of women. And in particular, we are tasked with sub-goal 2 to look at what should the political and economic situation really look like to allow women to participate in political and peace processes, and especially look at the very last phrase with a focus on care work. And I'd like us all to briefly look at how conflict prevention and women's involvement is defined in the National Action Plan, because I think there are a few really important recognitions already that is worth mentioning. First of all, and that's the second highlighted point, it is stipulated already that surely if you want to participate, then some level of economic security has to be given first. It is also recognized that probably this will be particularly difficult for women because of the burden of care work. And also in the very first sentence, we have that there is this heritage of our own historical experience that has taught us that this is how conflict prevention is best done. It's not exactly said what that historical experience is, but I do want to earmark it for all of us because we really want to tap into that. And I'll explain more how. And I do allow myself the anecdote that because we are celebrating a mere 50 years of women's suffrage, it's probably not the historical experience of women's participation in Switzerland. But that put aside, let's delve into the project. And it's really important for us to stipulate first what we mean when we speak about peace. And I do want to just follow on from what Lima Bowie already said today. We really follow the vision of a feminist peace. That is our compass. That is the yardstick against which we have and always will assess the WPS agenda. And that is not just for indulgence, and it's not also because we know that it's the best conflict prevention strategy to follow the vision of a feminist peace, but it's really because that is the founding spirit of the WPS agenda. We often refer to UN Security Council Resolution 1325, as this was in year 2000. But there was an entire history, right, of peace, feminist peace activism behind it. And certainly around the year 1995, with the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, from which WPS then eventually emerged, the idea was not to make war safer for women, but to advocate for women's rights across the world and to transform gender relations across the world once and for all, because that is the best way we prevent violence and conflict in the long run. There was an inherent tension inscribed in the agenda from the beginning, and that's because that tension was because feminist peace activists made the very conscious decision to inscribe and frame women's rights in the words of human security to make it pass through the Security Council. So from the very beginning, you had that agenda that was always with one foot in transnational peace activism, which aims to transform international security system, its frameworks, its concepts, and on the other, it is within the very Security Council and within those structures that the transnational feminist peace activism is criticizing and reflecting upon. So there has always been that tension. And it's no coincidence then that 46% of all national action plans across the globe don't follow the transformative approach which feminist peace activists would envision, but rather they implement it within a militarized understanding. Or as Talia Wall said earlier, it is really hard to implement it within a system that was not designed for it. And yet, and I think that is a really important point for us to make today, is that while tensions can be productive at times, that unease has increased. It is among civil society globally, it is within Switzerland and beyond, that there is a hesitancy whether national action plans are the right instrument, whether it is through collaboration within state institutions in implementing them, because precisely there is a fear that the implementation goes further and further away from that original spirit. Or rather, to quote Leymah Gbowee from earlier, you know, it is still a baby, and if anything, we actually don't see it evolve. And that is dangerous because of the particular time we are in. And we want to underline that because we basically cannot afford those tensions to increase. There really has to be a strengthening of trust, and there has to be a very clear commitment for the transformative approach, because we are living a time of a global backlash against women's rights. And so it would be very risky to let down feminist peace activism at its most vulnerable moment. And it's something that is not just to defend and protect feminist peace activists, but really it's in the service of all of us, because that backlash ultimately, it tries to dismantle liberal human rights and democracy tout court. So that's just one really important message we want to bring across. And so if feminist peace is our guiding star, what then is the problem with the status quo? And the status quo, we would refer that in sort of a dichotomous approach, right? That it is still a manly peace. We are still conducting manly peace building. And that manliness that is entrenched in the way we think about peace means that, again, it has been said before, the absence of war, the very fact that killing and with arms stops, is the benchmark for saying that we have reached peace. And all issues that are dubbed then feminine, and which are absolutely critical for a post-conflict resolution and social cohesion, and just in general of peaceful being together, such as education, healthcare, invisible and informal labor, they are never seriously included in peace building. They are always trumped by more important concerns over security and stability. And as such, we would say that what we have is at best a superficial or an unsustainable peace. And more importantly, as long as we continue to phrase peace through that manliness, we are blinding ourselves from what we call the continuum of violence, right? We do not recognize that violence is not something that stops with a peace agreement, or that only starts when the first arms are fired. Violence exists on a continuum, on a spectrum. It of course also includes SGBV. It of course also includes human rights violations of everyone. It changes through temporal and spatial continuums. So it can also move from the public sphere to the private sphere, etc., etc. All of these types of violences are security issues. And in failing to tackle these aspects as root causes of conflict and violence, which is what manly peace building does, we fail to do genuine conflict prevention. That is the problematic status quo. And if we use that lens of feminist peace and we recognize that violence exists indeed on a spectrum, then perhaps we will start looking differently at what peace in Switzerland, or how Switzerland promotes peace, looks like. Because if we zoom into that, we and the representatives of civil society we also spoke to, as much as the advisory board, we would share the assessment that peace, as we envision it, as a state where everyone can live free and respect their human rights and not be afraid to be different, as was stated earlier, is far from achieved in Switzerland. The obvious one, and it's the one that gets often discussed, is that we are involved in arms exports. It is the problem of policy consistency, right? So on the one hand, we are really good in promoting the respect of international law and human rights in multilateral fora. We are indeed involved in mediating conflicts. And yet, given the small size of the country, we are quite in a leading position globally in terms of arms exports. And that number does not even take into account special military goods or so-called dual-use goods. And between 2019 and 2020, we've had yet another record rise of 24% in our arms exports. And while it is also true that our legislation does not allow arms exports to conflicts that are in a war, it well goes to countries that are indirectly involved in wars. And with that, we also know if there is arms circulating, they are ultimately going to be used for human rights and women's rights violations. There was a specific reason why women peace activists campaigned for so many years, and WILP in particular, for gender-sensitive risk assessment to be included in the Arms Trade Treaty. So that is just one obvious reason why that peace in Switzerland is not yet achieved. But there are others that are perhaps less visible when we think about peace from a manly perspective. And that is that we still have a quarter of our population that is included from the fundamental right to shape the society they live in, because of the way we make naturalization processes so difficult and with so many hurdles. We also still have a number of structural discrimination, starting from gender inequitable distribution of underpaid or paid care work, SGBV, racism, the number would go on and on. These are all daily insecurities women and other marginalized groups face, and they are forms of violence. And it's also really important to recognize that that is an obstacle to political participation. Some of it is very obvious. There is a clear barrier. If you don't have the right to vote, you cannot participate. But it's also recognizing that if there is a daily microaggression, if there is institutional barriers, if there are limited resources, and by extension, of course, also simply a lack of mind space, head space, and time, you cannot participate meaningfully. So what we would like to advocate for is really that self-reflection would be good, at least for 3 reasons. First is the credibility. Our foreign policy, because of the inconsistency, is implausible, and as such, it is also vulnerable. And we believe that is particularly right now, in this political moment, dangerous. It is also to really shake the neocolonial implementation of the WPS agenda. Countries across the global north still pursue it as a foreign policy only. And as such, it cements the idea, and I quote here the very famous post-colonial scholar Gayatri Spivak, that it's essentially about brown women threatened by brown men who need the assistance of the international white community. And that spirit, by the way, is really quite tangible also when you look at national action plans across the global north. Just the illustrations in there, it's always women from the global south. And this has two very important consequences. It deflects from that continuum of violence. It deflects from the fact that violence happens within countries in the global north, and it deflects from the fact that these same countries commit violence in the global south. So it is really to sort of stipulate that violence, that is something that happens elsewhere, right? It's a problem others have and we assist. Self-reflection is important for our credibility. It's important for the neo-colonial concerns. And thirdly, it's really important for the political moment of the backlash, because it thrives on the argument that the WPS agenda is a Western agenda, which we all know is not true, right? It was thanks to Namibia that within 6 months we got this resolution, and it was mainly drafted and co-drafted by women from the global south. So for all these three reasons, we really think a more self-reflective approach, and there are also examples of countries who do that, who mention in the national action plans that there is also domestic problems in terms of violence, would be good at this particular moment. And so if it's not feminist peace, right, that has been secured, then let us take a step back and ask, what then is it that gives us a sense of safety on a daily basis in Switzerland and also in other countries? Well, we would say it is care work. And it is care work that allows us to go about our daily lives in the first place. It is, if perhaps you look at the picture of our report, right, which does not really make for a consistent, let me go back, you see that this is a collage, and it's, in our view, it's the care work that somehow provides the social net that makes this a congruent system, that makes the system work. That's sort of the analogy. And so nothing showed this role that care work, the invisible care work, plays more painfully than the global pandemic, right? It was all of a sudden the jobs that were essential and system relevant, as we call them here, they were all in the care economy, ranging from healthcare being the obvious one, but also education, retail, emergency services. And this is the one thing that is usually invisible. And it is, of course, also the aspect that gets exacerbated in times of armed conflict, because in that situation, the social infrastructure collapses completely. So it is even more shifted onto the shoulder of women. It is important, however, to say that care then does not just allow us to survive crisis and to go over, to provide us with a safety net. It is at the same time, and that's the dilemma, it is an obstacle to participation, because it is often invisible, it is precarious, and it is undervalued. And usually people who are active in the care economy are not consulted then in the decision-making of the crisis. They actually help us survive. And why is that? Well, the problem really, in a nutshell, is patriarchy. Because to quote a new feminist association that has been founded in Switzerland, Economie Feminist, women have been told for centuries that what they do every day is basically worthless. And we too, as policymakers, as decision makers, have internalized that. We have internalized that we can basically neglect the care economy as a factor. But if we are serious about women's participation, then we need to look at the foundation of our society. We cannot ignore the care economy and expect women to participate if they are basically being drowned in there. And it is problematic because it is not going to change in a capitalist system, because it is not profitable. The care economy and care work essentially is relational work. And that is something you can only automate until a certain degree, and it will not be profitable then. You cannot optimize it endlessly. But it is, and it must be, our first priority in terms of investment from a human security point of view. To come back to the idea of violence being a continuum, the issue of care work as both a burden and an obstacle is the same, whether it is in Switzerland or in a context of armed conflict. It's not a difference in nature, it's only a difference in scale. And so in both countries, we have to start being serious. If we are serious about enabling participation, we have to start taking the care economy seriously. And after all of this, so yeah, that's the vicious circle I wanted to illustrate. It is really that double bind of care work is the one thing that allows us to survive through crisis, but then again, the care economy is in a constant state of crisis. And you will hear more about that in the speakers after me. But so if all of that is established, then what is to be done? Our recommendations, so to speak, we have them, and there are several, and I only picked a number of them, but they are all in the report. And I just want to go through these 5. And that is, the first one is really that we would like Switzerland to see adopt the feminist notion of peace. Again, especially important in times of backlash, especially also timely given that Switzerland is running for a non-permanent seat at the UN Security Council. We would like that phrase of Switzerland's own historical experience being filled with meaning, and perhaps also refer to present days, and that the next National Action Plan explicitly refers to the fact that there are still violence and security issues faced by women and other minority groups within the country. There are other countries that already do that. And while I agree with Talia Wohl that there is now a national strategy on gender equality that is congruent, it would still be very important to have that out there, really recognized. And not just recognized, but also then with domestic institutional actors included, and also additional funding for the domestic implementation. Thirdly, we really want that there is a recognition that Swiss arms exports and violent conflicts are related, and so is then the perpetration of women's human rights violations, and therefore, of course, for us, the benchmarks would be a stop to all arms exports. Fourth, we would like that the value of care work is recognized and the problems associated with it as well, and that therefore, as much as we heard from Barbara Detwiller-Scheuer, we are active in actually redistributing and reducing care work in other contexts, that there is that commitment within Switzerland as well. And lastly, really put the care economy at the center of peace building and international cooperation. And with that, we have several suggestions how to go about that, but one would really be that any actor, be it our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, be it our Secretary of State of Economics, all these actors should first analyze how is the care economy organized, what are people's needs in terms of care and in each context, and then only start intervening. And of course, those who actually provide the care work, they should be systematically consulted and included when we decide about how we design programs and how we budget for them. And last but not least, it is a suggestion, of course, but we know that conflict-affected states rarely are welfare states. So one way to go about this would be that a minimum percentage of all the money, including the one from private companies that is invested in a post-war economy, is automatically redirected for investment in the care economy. So with that, I leave that. I hope we've raised some questions and hopefully also some thoughts, but that is what we've been working on in the past 18 months. And we hope it's been inspiring for your own work in wherever context you may be active. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Leandra, for giving us insight into our project and for presenting the results, and by this also laying the foundation for the following inputs. Thanks so much, Leandra. The following three inputs are very special for us because all three people were also interlocutors in our project. They already contributed greatly to the results which we can share today. We'll start the next part with Florence, and I'm really honored to be able to present you Florence. Florence Mikali is a Women Human Rights Defenders Toolkit Project Officer at Peace Brigades International in Kenya. She is a human rights defender and gender enthusiast with a wealth of experience in gender and human rights work. She has previously been involved in human rights work at Amnesty International Kenya and at the Coalition on Violence Against Women, and has extensive experience in training on women human rights, particularly in sexual and reproductive health rights, gender equality, and violence against women. She envisions a gender equal society where the rights of everyone are respected. Thanks very much, Florence, for being here, and I'm giving the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here. I'll start by mentioning that I actually work with women human rights defenders who are generally seen as the invisible women who are doing a lot of work in the peace area. And the social economic conditions under which they work really makes their work not very visible, yet they do a lot. So looking at the care work and the participation of women in the peace processes, I would start by saying care workers are predominantly women, and you will find that majority of people in care work are women as compared to the number of men. So they spend a bigger fraction of their time doing the care work, as opposed to men who are doing other sort of work that are seen as more rewarding. So this leaves them with very little time or no time at all to participate in other processes like the political or the economic side of the bargain. So actually, even those who are doing paid care work, they end up having double burden, because even before they go working like either nurses or teachers, they have to first accomplish or organize how their work, like feeding the children, cleaning the house, will be done. Then now they proceed to that other work. And all this can be attributed to the way we've been socialized, because our systems are very patriarchal and they place a lot of power on the man, and the woman is mostly left at the receiving end. So as we grow, like where I come from, we grow knowing that women are there to be seen. Like when you're born, you're told your space is mostly the private space, but men mostly occupy the public space. So you will find when children are growing up, the girls are socialized to start cleaning the house, cooking for the family, fetching firewood, and helping around the kitchen, while the boys will be sent out to herd the cattle or even go with their fathers and grandfathers outside. The private life is very invisible, because what is done there is seen as though it doesn't have a lot of value. It's rarely highlighted, and it's even lowly rewarded, if at all it does. And so women are ignored in making decisions, even when the decisions in that care economy concern them. So you find that they are absent in the decision-making tables, especially the formal ones. But we fail to recognize that also women are very key in contributing to peace work. Even though they are not given the formal spaces, they have a lot of other informal spaces where they do so. Like around here, we see women having a lot of social gatherings, and within those areas, they are able to like negotiate or discuss within themselves. So looking at COVID, yeah, it's true. I heard even from another presenter who was before me, how COVID has increased the burden of care for women, because with the measures that came into place, people were forced to stay at home. And so the care work at home fell on the women. And in as much as both women and men were working from home and staying at home, it's clear that there's an equal distribution of the care work, because the men will just sit and do their online stuff while the women will still continue with the housework as they focus on their other work. And this has a great implication on equality, because it creates barriers to full participation of women. The opportunities that are given to men and boys by the society limit the woman to participate. For example, in terms of education, job opportunities, economic gains and wealth, they will limit a woman to participate like in political spaces. And so you'll need money to campaign, which you don't have. Maybe you don't have property, you don't have a well-paying job. And so when you're competing with these men in that level, then you're disadvantaged. We're looking at how then we can support this meaningful participation for women. And being that one of the major things that contributes is the gender norms and stereotypes, then we need to get into conversations that will help us eradicate these gender stereotypes that continue to exacerbate or even make the situation worse for women. And one of the tools we've been using is, it's an approach actually, it's called SASA. SASA is a community mobilization tool that is in 4 phases. SASA is an acronym. It is ASA. In Kiswahili, SASA means now. And now shows the urgency with which we need to treat this issue. So we need to start encouraging or increasing a participation of women in WPS as early as now. So it's very urgent. SASA is an acronym for start, awareness, support, and action. Originally, this is from the Raising Voices in Uganda. It's an approach that they were using for violence against women. And actually is in the first stage where it's talking about start. It shows that you have power. So your starting point is the power that you have. And we have to recognize that women have individual power to participate in these processes. So it talks about power within individual women. Then the second phase is the power over, and this is where awareness is created that men have, a lot of men have power over women and use it negatively. The third stage or phase is power with. This is where it talks about putting power together. Yes, we have, women are not homogeneous. We have women who are advanced. We have others at the grassroots, but all this with their individual powers, when we put them together, they're able to do something. They're able to support each other and increase their participation in these processes. Then we have the last phase that is called action phase. And this is where now women are already empowered and they are able to find their own solutions to their problems. They are able to deal with the situations on their own. And here, this is where we see now women vying for political seats. We see women sitting on boards. We see women making decisions that are normally viewed as men. And we see men venturing into areas that are seen as men areas. We need to have conversations that are using this SASA approach so that we are also able to promote and recognize and also promote acceptance of even women who are working in the grassroots. We also need like to network and build, create linkages where these like women who are working in the grassroots are able to connect with other women who are already out there in the bigger space for exchange. And then, of course, there's the transfer of knowledge and capacity building that will enable these women who are not participating fully to gain the confidence and now to start participating. SASA is used because it's very personal and it calls people into a reflection kind of mode. You are there sitting and you start asking yourself what, why, and yeah, you try to think about the situation and like forge way forward. And it also involves everyone. That is why it's a very good approach to use, because it is all inclusive, and the voice, even of those that are considered minority, are incorporated into the whole agenda. One of the other things that we use is games, or we try to get something that is going into the mind of people for long. So we've done things like murals. These are large drawings on the wall. Of course, we know a lot of women, especially up country, have little or limited access to education. And so they are able to even identify with pictures and drawings without having to necessarily read. And so, yeah, so if we have to get this sustainable change, we need to changing norms and stereotypes require a lot of time, and people have to hear and see so that now they are able to internalize what change there needs to be. And so about male involvement, I had, there was a question on how men will get involved, but we also acknowledge that it's good for men to feel and experience firsthand like what women experience so that they are able to support them. And this is where you use a game like A Mile in Her Shoes. I don't know if many of you have heard about that game. It's a game that just triggers like the feelings and experiences. Men wear high heels and are supposed to walk for a mile in high heels so that they feel what women feel. I know wearing the high heels is not exactly what the women feel, but it's a good way of being in the shoe of another person. So when you're limiting another person, you get to understand what that person feels. So the high heels are supposed to act as barriers, and they represent a lot of the barriers that women go through when trying to succeed or to actively participate. So it's actually used to raise awareness and to end like violence against women. So such are the strategies I think would work in trying to increase the participation. Otherwise, on conclusion, I'll say women have a very big potential. There's a lot of room for them to build peace, because I believe they are the best negotiators. They are very good mediators. Women are peacemakers. Women are decision makers, even as much as people don't think that they have something tangible they are bringing, but they are very good decision makers. And they're also wealth creators. So women have all that it takes, and there's a very big potential in women. So all we need is just to create the right conditions for them to fully participate in peace processes. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Florence. I'm really happy to have been able to listen to you and to you sharing your perspective and your experiences. Thanks so much. Der nächste Input ist von Elvira Wiegers. Sie kann leider heute nicht persönlich hier sein, aber glücklicherweise hat sie dennoch ihren Input auf Video aufgezeichnet, sodass wir sie trotzdem auf eine Art mit uns haben können. Elvira Wiegers ist bei der Service Public Gewerkschaft VPOD zuständig für den Gesundheitssektor. Davor arbeitete sie für eine internationale Entwicklungsgenossenschaft und als Wirtschaftsredaktorin. Sie befasst sich seit Beginn ihrer beruflichen Laufbahn intensiv mit der Frage nachhaltiger, solidarischer und gerechter Strukturen und mit dem Weg dahin.
Ja, das ist eine sehr wichtige, sogar eine zentrale Frage, meine ich. Und die Antwort ist aber leider niederschmetternd. Die Frauen wurden so gut wie gar nicht mit einbezogen. Das haben wir an einem Beispiel gesehen, als die Pandemie ausbrach, das beim Thema Kinderbetreuung. Es wurden ganz schnell die riesigen Defizite, die staatlichen, behördlichen, bei den Strukturen festgestellt. Großeltern fielen von heute auf morgen aus und auf einen Schlag geriet die ganze Kinderbetreuung ins Wanken. Auch dort mussten die Frauen dann wieder in die Bresche springen, kamen aber natürlich gleichzeitig unter einen sehr großen Druck, wie sie dann noch ihre Berufe weiter ausführen können. Wären die Frauen von Anfang an einbezogen worden, hätte man diese Kinderbetreuung wahrscheinlich schneller geregelt und besser geregelt. Auch hier muss ich leider diese Frage verneinen bzw. negativ beantworten. Auch hier fand keinen Einbezug der Frauen statt, und zwar, weil einfach grundsätzlich diese Anerkennung fehlt, welchen zentralen Anteil die Frauen überhaupt spielen, beitragen an der Bewältigung einer Krise. Und dies geschieht ja eben nicht nur über die unbezahlte Care-Arbeit, sondern vor allem eben auch über die bezahlte Care-Arbeit. Ohne die Frauen, die 3/4 des Anteils ausmachen in der Langzeitpflege und Betreuung, sogar weit über 80%, dass sie diesen zentralen Anteil tragen, das wird nicht wahrgenommen. Die Frauen nicht einzubeziehen beim Handeln dieser Krise, aber auch bei der Entscheidungsfindung bezüglich sinnvoller und notwendiger Maßnahmen, fehlt auch ganz klar diese Anerkennung der Beiträge der Frauen, und diese scheinen absolut nicht wahrgenommen zu werden oder schlichtwegs ignoriert zu werden bei Politik und Wirtschaft. Wir haben jetzt in den letzten 1,5 Jahren wahrnehmen müssen und können, dass die Frauen einfach grundsätzlich nicht in ihrer Rolle als sehr wichtige Akteure zum Erhalt der Gesellschaft und der Volkswirtschaft über die bezahlte Care-Arbeit, dass sie einfach nicht einbezogen werden, und zwar, weil auch die Strukturen dafür fehlen oder eine Regelung dafür fehlt. Es fehlt eine gesetzliche Grundlage dafür, und es fehlt aber, und das ist vielleicht im Moment das größte Hindernis, an politischem Willen. Ich bin davon überzeugt, dass die Frauen einzubeziehen zu in der Realität häufig dann machbareren Lösungen, verträglicheren Lösungen quasi zu finden, die vor allem dann eben auch für die Frauen stimmiger wären. Also wieder dieses Beispiel mit der Kinderbetreuung. Das war sehr langwierig, sehr harzig, mühselig und hat einen irrsinnigen Energieverschleiß hervorgebracht bei den Frauen, und das hätte anders und besser gelöst werden können, und das hätten die Frauen gemacht, wenn sie einbezogen worden wären, weil sie verstehen, wie wichtig es ist, dass die bezahlte und unbezahlte Care-Arbeit gut funktionieren kann. Also ich kann das ganz klar bejahen für den Gesundheitsbereich, für die Gesundheitsversorgung. Dort haben wir eigentlich schon seit Jahren eine Krise, die aber weder in der Öffentlichkeit, aber auch in der Politik nicht wahrgenommen oder sogar einfach ignoriert werden. Ein Grund liegt natürlich darin, dass für die vorwiegend weiblichen Gesundheitspflegefachpersonen die Gesundheitsversorgung, die Pflege und Betreuung der ihnen anvertrauten Menschen an absolut oberster Stelle steht. Und das wird durchgezogen bis in den eigenen körperlichen und psychischen Ruin. Und dieses Gesundheitspersonal ist schon sehr lange am Anschlag, erschöpft, ausgelaugt. Und diese Pandemie hat das natürlich jetzt noch auf eine sehr elende Art verstärkt. Und da stehen wir heute nun und es ist ganz klar, dass es so nicht weitergehen kann. Es gibt da halt so verschieden, wie wir Menschen sind, die verschiedensten Formen. Was wahrscheinlich eine der schlimmsten Auswüchse ist, sind diejenigen Menschen, und das ist aber auch total nachzuvollziehen, die jetzt schweigend oder auch hässig, frustriert, empört, aber den Beruf verlassen, die aussteigen. Wir haben ja fast 40% der Personen, die aus dem Beruf aussteigen, weil sie einfach schlichtweg die Arbeitsbedingungen nicht mehr ertragen. Wir haben eine sehr tiefe durchschnittliche Verweildauer. All das spricht eine sehr deutliche Sprache, dass etwas passieren muss. Wir haben aber auch Leute, die bleiben und die versuchen, diese Arbeitsbedingungen zu verbessern, zusammen etwa mit Gewerkschaften, für die ich arbeite, aber auch auf politischem Weg. Und das ist das, was wir im Moment mit allen unseren vereinten Kräften machen. Wir sind dabei, in den Betrieben zusammen mit dem Personal dafür einzustehen, dass sich die Arbeitsbedingungen verbessern, und wir machen dies auch auf der politischen Ebene. Bislang ist es so, dass Politik und Wirtschaft sich gegenseitig den Ball zuschiebt, immer sagen, es ist die andere Seite jeweils verantwortlich. Und wir haben es jetzt doch immerhin geschafft, dass wir beide Akteure in einer nationalen Plattform an einen Tisch gekriegt haben. Und dort findet dieser sehr notwendige und wichtige Austausch statt. Also es muss etwas an der Basis passieren, nämlich Nein zu sagen. Und es muss etwas auf der politischen Ebene passieren, nämlich eben auch Nein zu sagen im Namen des Gesundheitspersonals. So nicht weiter. Wir haben nach den Erfahrungen des Frauenstreiks 2019 haben wir beschlossen, mit dieser Euphorie und mit dieser Dynamik, die da entstanden ist, weiterzuarbeiten und haben überlegt, wie wir das in den Gesundheitsbereich hineintransportieren können. Wir haben dann begonnen, Crashkurse anzubieten, Fight for Your Rights, und die kommen sehr gut an. Und in diesen Crashkursen, die ich im Moment vor allem gebe, versuchen wir den vor allem Frauen aufzuzeigen, was ihre Rechte sind, aber auch was ihre Pflichten sind und wie eben dieser Weg des Nein-Sagen-Könnens, wie der aussehen könnte. Und immer wieder kommt natürlich dort auch die Message mit dazu, dass ein Kampf alleine kein schöner Kampf ist oder ein Konflikt oder ein Streit oder das Suchen eben eines Weges hin zu besseren Arbeitsbeziehungen, sondern dass es sehr wichtig ist, sich zu vernetzen, sich zu organisieren, sich zusammenzuschließen, zu reden miteinander und dann gemeinsam Lösungen zu suchen. Im Moment machen wir genau das in einer aktuellen Kampagne, und zwar heißt die Road to Strike. Und da fahren wir mit einem Bus, schweizweit in die Gesundheitsinstitutionen und besuchen die Leute vor Ort, bieten Kurse an, sind aber auch einfach da und beantworten Fragen, hören uns Probleme an und diskutieren auch dort Möglichkeiten, sich zu wehren gegen unlautere Arbeitsbedingungen. Das kommt sehr gut an und ja, stärkt uns wirklich darin, wie wichtig diese Basisarbeit ist. Denn nur wenn sich die Basis, ich sag mal, bewegt und mobilisiert, wird das auch Etagen höher dann zu einer Änderung führen. Das finde ich eine heikle Frage. Ich versuche sie so gut wie möglich zu beantworten. Es wird ja immer gesagt, das liegt uns Frauen im Blut, empathisch zu sein, zu lieben, zu umsorgen und zu umhegen. Das mag sein, dazu möchte ich mich nicht äußern. Ich freue mich über jeden empathischen Menschen auf dieser Welt. Was ich feststelle beim Gesundheitspersonal mit den vielen Menschen, vor allem Frauen, die ich jetzt im Laufe meiner Arbeit treffen und sprechen durfte, diese Frauen haben einen ungeheuren ethischen Kompass und es ist diesen Frauen, und zwar aus eben professioneller Sicht und nicht, weil sie Frauen sind, ein wahnsinniges Anliegen, das, was sie in ihren Berufen gelernt haben, eben auch entsprechend umsetzen zu können. Und dazu gehört eben eine hochqualifizierte, hochprofessionelle Betreuung. Und das ist auch etwas, worauf sie stolz sind, auf diese qualitativ hochstehende Gesundheitsversorgung, die sie ja quasi verantworten. Und dafür haben sie auch die höchste Anerkennung verdient. Anerkennung nicht nur finanzieller Natur durch bessere Löhne, sondern eben auch Anerkennung in Form von einbezogen werden, mitentscheiden dürfen, mitsprechen dürfen. Also das ist ganz klar der Fall. Ohne die unbezahlte Care-Arbeit würde unsere Gesellschaft zusammenbrechen bzw. schlichtweg nicht existieren. Und ohne die bezahlte Care-Arbeit gäbe es keine Gesundheitsversorgung, würde die Gesundheitsversorgung kollabieren. Es ist eigentlich sehr frappierend, wie zentral die Frauen als Akteurinnen sind in dieser Gesellschaft, aber eben auch in der Volkswirtschaft. Frauen leisten einen absolut zentralen Beitrag zur Krisenbewältigung und müssen deshalb zwingend in die Entscheidungsfindung einbezogen werden, dort teilnehmen können, wo entschieden wird über Maßnahmen, wo geregelt wird, wie das tägliche Leben in Krisen, aber auch nach der Krise stattfinden soll. Dort überall können und müssen und wollen vor allem die Frauen.
Vielen Dank an Elvira. Wir geben ihr den Applaus weiter. Gerne würde ich nun weitergehen und habe die Freude, Theodora vorzustellen. Theodora Leci studierte Rechtswissenschaften und Geschichte in Rio de Janeiro und Germanistik an der Universität Freiburg. Seit 25 Jahren ist sie bei der feministischen Friedensorganisation CFD als Fachfrau in den Gebieten Migration und Gender tätig und ist im Bereich Migrationspolitik für mehrere Projekte verantwortlich. Seit 2007 führt sie das Projekt Migrantinnen in den Netzwerken der Arbeitswelt, Berufsmentoring mit Migrantinnen durch, dessen Ziel es ist, dass hochqualifizierten Migrantinnen der Einstieg in den Arbeitsmarkt in ihrem Fachbereich gelingt. Zwischen 2009 und 2019 konzipierte und co-leitete Theodora Leci das Programm Teilnehmen, Teilhaben, politisches Mentoring mit Migrantinnen. Zudem ist Theodora Mitglied in verschiedenen themenspezifischen Gremien, unter anderem in der Fachkommission für Altersfragen, außerdem im Kooperationsgremium gegen Menschenhandel und in der Fachgruppe Halt Gewalt gegen Frauen. Theodora, ich freue mich sehr fest, dass du hier bist und gebe gern das Wort dir.
Vielen Dank. Guten Tag an alle, die an dieser Webinarrunde teilnehmen. Ich bin sehr froh, dass ich heute zu dieser Konferenz eingeladen wurde. Herzlichen Dank für die Einladung. Wie Andrea bereits gesagt hat, ich arbeite in der Abteilung Migrationspolitik und Friedenspolitik der CFD, die feministische Friedensorganisation. Heute werde ich Ihnen anhand der CFD-Projekt aufzeigen, wie der CFD Frauen, Frieden, Sicherheit und Care in der Praxis begegnet und welche Ansätze er braucht, um die gesellschaftliche Transformation einzufordern. Doch zuerst etwas zum CFD. Der CFD ist eine feministische Friedensorganisation, die aktiv in der internationalen Zusammenarbeit der Migrationspolitik und der Friedenpolitik tätig ist. Als feministische Friedensorganisation arbeitet der CFD mit einem weiteren positiven Friedensbegriff, der alle Formen von Gewalt, Ausschluss und Diskriminierung umfasst. Frieden bedeutet nicht nur die Abwesenheit von Krieg oder physischer Gewalt, sondern auch Gleichberechtigung und Gleichgerechtigkeit für alle Menschen, unabhängig ihres biologischen und sozialen Geschlechts, ihre Herkunft, ihre sozialen Staaten, ihre politischen oder religiösen Überzeugungen. Im Migrationsbereich setzt sie der CFD ein für die Teilhabe von Migranten in Politik und Gesellschaft und eröffnet ihnen mit Projekten in dem Bereich Arbeit, Bildung, Handlung und Spielräume. Jetzt möchte ich Ihnen Friedensansätze präsentieren, die der CFD bei seiner Arbeit benutzt. Um ein Verständnis davon zu geben, was wir bei CFD unter Frieden verstehen, möchte ich es mit dem Begriff Gerechtigkeit darlegen. Wir sagen, ohne Gerechtigkeit für alle Menschen gibt es keinen Frieden. Es gibt keinen Frieden, solange Kinder verhungern müssen, solange es Menschen gibt, die keine Zuhause haben, solange Mädchen oder Frauen gibt, die Angst vor sexueller Belästigung haben müssen. Frieden bedeutet, dass alle Menschen die gleiche Chance haben, die Chance, den Beruf erlernen zu können, den sie wollen, die Chance, in den Beruf zu arbeiten, die sie gelernt haben, sowie wählen können, welche Beziehung sie eingehen wollen. Und damit möchte ich nun überleitet auf die praxische Ebene. Nicht jede Art von Gewalt ist auf den ersten Blick als Gewalt zu erkennen und wird direkt von einer bestimmten Person, einem Täter oder einer Täterin ausgeübt. Frauen mit Migrationserfahrung erleben in der Schweiz oft Gewalt in Form von Diskriminierung und Ausgrenzungen aller Art. Die strukturelle politische Gewalt beschränkt ihre Handlungsmöglichkeiten und damit ihre Lebensentwürfe. Die ausländischen politischen Bedingungen, mit welchen Migrantinnen und Migranten konfrontiert werden, sind als solche strukturelle Gewalt zu verstehen, weil sie Teil der gesellschaftlichen, institutionellen und politischen Strukturen sind. Dabei zeigt die Genderperspektive, dass gleichzeitig Frau und Migrant zu sein, die Schwierigkeiten noch verstärkt. Wenn Migrantinnen von häuslicher Gewalt betroffen sind, befinden sich in einer Zwangslage und einem abhängigen Verhältnis. Denn durch die ausländerrechtlichen Bestimmungen kann eine Trennung oder Scheidung von Ehemann ihren Aufenthaltsstatus gefährdet, wenn ihr Aufenthaltszweck an den Verbleib bei Ehemann gebunden ist. Migranten, die von häuslicher Gewalt konfrontiert sind, bleiben oft in einer Beziehung und erniedrigenden Situation. Der strukturelle Rahmen ermöglicht es, dass zugewanderte Frauen von mehreren Gewaltformen betroffen sind. Denn die ausländerrechtlichen Normen sehen hier keine direkten Mechanismen vor, welche den menschenrechtlichen Schutz in den Vordergrund stehen. Migrantinnen müssen stattdessen Gesuche vorlegen und ihre Aufenthalt allenfalls durch individuelle und den Ermessen nach ausgesetzte harte Fallregelungen sicher zu lassen. Hier arbeiten wir mit Informationsveranstaltungen für Frauen mit Migrationsgeschichte und mit verschiedenen Frauenberatungsstellen. Informationen als Instrumenten nutzen wir. Qualifizierte Migranten erleben Schwierigkeiten in den Arbeitsmarkt einzusteigen, weil ihre ausländischen Diplome in der Schweiz nicht anerkannt werden. Deshalb finden gut qualifizierte Migranten sehr oft nur in der Tieflohnbranche Ausstellen, wenn überhaupt. Dadurch können ihre formal oder nicht formal erworbene Kompetenzen weniger genutzt werden. Und das tiefe Einkommen verstärkt die Abhängigkeit. Ist das Aufenthaltszweck dieser Frau an die Ehe und den Verbleib bei Ehemann gebunden, akkumulieren sie Abhängigkeit und Ausbeutrisiken zusätzlich. In CFD-Berufsmentoring-Programme erhält qualifizierte Migranten Zugang zu Informationen, den Wiederaufbau des Sozialkapitals und die Empowerment. Migrantinnen werden als Arbeitnehmerinnen sichtbar gemacht und die strukturellen Ausschlussmechanismen werden aufgedeckt durch Sensibilisierung der Privatwirtschaft und das Lobby der Mentorinnen und die Öffentlichkeitsarbeit des CFD. Ressource statt Defizitorientierung, Stärkung des Selbstvertrauens, bessere Vernetzung, Bedürfnisorientierung und Partizipation. In der Partizipationsarbeit gehen wir von einem umfassenden Partizipationsbegriff aus, der die gleichberechtigte Teilhabe und Teilnahme aller umfasst. Entstanden sind darauf Projekte wie politische Mentoring, die Stadtrundgang, Orte der Teilhabe oder der Filmeprojekt Wir mit Bürgerinnen. Es sind Projekte, in denen Frauen mit Migrationserfahrung ins Zentrum gerückt werden, die mitreden wollen und dies oft nicht dürfen. Der CFD bietet einen Raum, wo Mitsprache reflektiert, praktiziert und gefordert wird. Seine Engagement im Bereich der politischen Partizipation von Frauen mit Migrationserfahrung geht weit. Dies, um Entscheidungsprozesse zu erweitern und öffentliche Räume für die Reflexion über an der Teilhabe aller orientiert Sozialpolitik zu schaffen. Ein Fünftel der Wohnbevölkerung in der Schweiz sind Menschen mit Migrationserfahrung. Sie sind von politischen Entscheiden betroffen, von der formellen politischen Mitbestimmung jedoch weitergehend ausgeschlossen. Migranten sind in den Fürsorgearbeit und Pflegebereich überrepräsentiert. Care-Leistung, das heißt Pflege, Sorge, Fürsorge im weitesten Sinn, ob unbezahlt oder bezahlt, privat oder öffentlich, sind überwiegend Frauen ausgeübte Tätigkeit, die weitergehende unbedacht bleiben und unzureichend entlohnt werden. Die mangelnden gesellschaftliche Anerkennung sowie eine unterdurchschnittliche ökonomische Entlohnung sind ein strukturelles Problem unserer Gesellschaft. Die Pandemie hatte die verstärkte Ungleichheit gezeigt. Frauen mit Migrationserfahrung und geflüchtete Frauen sind die am stärksten der Pandemie ausgesetzte. Paradoxerweise zeigt sie gerade in Zeiten der Pandemie die Systemrelevanz von genau den Berufen, die gesellschaftlich nicht Anerkennung bekommen, die ihnen zustehen. Arbeitsmigranten sind in besonderem Umfang von Ausbeutung betroffen. Arbeitsmigranten, vor allem Frauen, arbeiten häufig für niedrige Lohn und in prekäre und unsichere Arbeitsverhältnisse. Sie arbeiten in der Pflege, im Reinigungsbereich, in Supermarktberufen, die gesellschaftlich abgewertet werden und deren Bedeutung unsichtbar gemacht wird. Im CARE-Projekt arbeiten wir mit Wirtschaftskompetenzmethoden. Dabei entwickeln wir gemeinsam Strategie und die Anliegen von Chancengleichheit, Gleichteilhabe und Gleichstellung von Frauen mit Migrationserfahrung und geflüchtete Frauen in der Schweiz gemeinsam zu vertreten. Potenzielle und Handlungsspielräume erkennen und erweitern. Das versuchen wir. Vielfalt der Ausschlussmechanismen. Die Lebensbedingungen von Migranten in der Schweiz sind von verschiedenen Formen der Diskriminierung und Benachteiligung geprägt. Die strukturelle Gewalt als ein Element des staatlichen Ausschlusses ist in der öffentlichen Debatte oft nicht sichtbar. Zum Schluss, wir betreiben eine feministische Friedenspolitik, sowohl auf der praktischen wie auf der diskursiven Ebene. In der Schweiz bedeutet das, die politische Diskussion zu analysieren und mitzuhelfen, die verdrängten Themen auf den Tisch zu bringen. Zum Beispiel in der Migrationspolitik und in der Zusammenarbeit mit Migranten. Dabei fragen wir nicht, was den Migranten noch fehlt und was wir ihnen alles noch beibringen können, damit sie integrieren können, mit den Betonen auf sie, sondern wir fragen, welche Ressourcen die Frau mit Migrationserfahrung mitbringt und welche Barrieren und Hindernisse unsere Gesellschaft aufbaut und sogenannte Fremde an der Partizipation zu hindern. Die Empowerment-Methode aus Praxis und der Konstruktion von Diskurs nutzt der CFD in seinem Projekt. Mit der intersektionalen dekolonialen Gleichstellungspolitik-Ansatz wollen wir nicht nur Diskriminierungsschutz, sondern auch aktive Antirassismus fordern. Ich danke euch für eure Aufmerksamkeit.
Thank you so much, Teodora Leite. Now I'm assuming the stage. My name is Isabel Barros. I'm a program manager for feminist peace policy in the CFD, and I have the privilege to be part of this important group. I think my first question would go to Florence as well, that go a little bit in this direction of what Mardo Zachary was asking. So Florence, how do you see the role played by international organizations in the protection and promotion of human rights defenders in Kenya? And what could, in your opinion, be improved or changed so that international partnership reach their full potential?
Okay, the first question was the role of international organizations in supporting human rights defenders. International organizations have a role in amplifying the voice of the human rights defenders on the ground. So basically, like the violations that are seen locally, if not amplified by the international organizations, they may not be known by many people. So we've had like speaker tours where our human rights defenders visit international human rights defenders, and they share the situations and exchange. So it's like learning process and an exchange. So that is the role of the international organization.
Okay, I'm going to Theodora. Can you please share with us which are the main difficulties or challenges that you encounter in your work nowadays?
Also, die erste ist die finanzielle Ressource. Es ist wirklich schwierig, eine Projekte wirklich sicherzustellen. Wenn die Projekte am Anfang läuft, ich benutze fast 30% meiner Arbeitszeit an Fundraiser zu machen. Das ist das Erste. Die zweite sind, dass ich immer wieder in meiner Arbeit konfrontiert sind mit der Diskriminierung. Und die Diskriminierung und die Stereotypisierung von Frauen mit Migrationshintergrund, ganz besonders, wenn sie aus Afrika kommen und aus Südamerika. Das wird wirklich, es ist so latent, dass hier in der Schweiz solche Sachen noch begegnen, ist für mich etwas, das ich noch nicht jede Zeit, wenn ich mit denen konfrontiert bin, ich fühle mich selber auch eingegriffen. Das sind die Sachen, die ich habe. Und die Repräsentativität in der Institution, die fehlende Einbeziehung von Betroffenen im Entscheidungsprozess. Ich höre immer wieder, es gibt immer so wohlwollende Leute, die für Migranten sprechen möchten, aber ich verstehe das nicht ganz genau, weil die Migrant hat Mund. Sie kann selber für sie stimmen und es gibt so viele gut qualifizierte Migranten in verschiedenen Bereichen und auch von aller Ethnie. Es gibt immer noch Leute, die wollen für die Frauen ansprechen. Und das finde ich, für mich ist eine von den hartsten Sachen. Und auch die Diskriminierung von qualifizierten Migranten in der Arbeitsmarkt. Und zwar, das wieder geht an diese Stereotypisierung, die wirklich latent ist und vor allem Frauen, die aus Afrika kommen. Das ist ganz hart, wirklich. Und von andere Sache, dass würde ich mich sehr begrüßen, ist zum Beispiel, wenn ein neues Projekt lanciert wurde und dieses Projekt Erfolg zeigt, dass wenn wir weiter Finanzierung suchen, es ist immer, nein, wir möchten etwas Neues. Es ist immer diese Projektitis-Gedanke und man sieht nicht, was wirklich um die Projekt vorgehen. Und andere noch, dass die Institutionen wollen nur Zahlen sehen. Sie schauen nicht qualitativ, sondern quantitativ. Das ist eine von den, ich konnte hier die ganze Zeit reden, aber noch etwas, das ich möchte euch noch sagen, wir arbeiten mit Empowerment, aber nicht in den Sinn wie in die Imaginarium von der Einheimischen, dass wir die Frau empowern. Nein, die Frauen kommen schon empowern in der Schweiz und hier werden sie systematisch empowern, wo sie überall diese Defizitstempel bekommen. Und dann machen wir diese Empowerment mehr in den Kollektiv gedacht, wo wir auch die Institution sagen, hey, hier sie ist nicht Defizit.
Thank you so much, Theodora. I think that's what the National Action Plan is all about, and the contribution of the civil society is so central. So I think that by one hand, we have a space to open, but we want to speak, and that you made it very clear with your words. Thank you so much.
What was meant with a reference to taking Canada or Sweden as an example. And what we meant there is really, and we glossed over it, and I'm gonna, again, not go into detail, but it's really that the Canadian National Action Plan right now really mentions black on white, that it recognizes that indigenous population and indigenous women in particular have both historically suffered from discrimination, but also today. And that's what I meant, like it is testimony of a certain self-reflection, and it's not just mentioned, it's also that domestic government bodies are implementing partners. As for Sweden, I meant more that they don't just have a feminist foreign policy, but they also have a whole of government feminist approach. And so in terms of congruency, these two, of course, speak to each other. That being said, and I know we have civil society representatives, at least from Sweden, among us today, and I'm sure they would again be mentioning, that there too still a lot of inconsistencies, especially if we then go back to the topic of arms exports, for example. Nevertheless, we think it is a really powerful symbol, and that's why I think it's inspiring and worth mentioning.
Thank you so much for your contribution, Leandra. Florence, if you already have thought about what can be improved in this partnership?
Personally, what I think could be improved is on awareness raising. We rarely do awareness raising together, and we could explore areas where we can have joint events or campaigns, so that we seem to be speaking in one voice, and we don't have like the government saying as those are those people and these are these people, because it will give more recognition and acceptance of the human rights on the ground.
Thank you so much, Florence. I think it's really central what you said, because then we escape the discourse of the we and us. And if you all have access to this, to the Leporello here in my hands, you would see that international politics and domestic politics are not very far from each other either. So I would like to pass the word to analyzing, and thank you all the contributors and the participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel, and thanks to all the speakers for your very rich and very pertinent and very impressive contributions to that debate. I mean, the whole overall question of how to promote socioeconomic conditions that actually allow for participation has been answered from so many different angles, starting from working with stereotypes, transforming stereotypes, engaging with boys and men as allies in that process, then focusing on care and the care economy and the crucial foundation it provides for any transformational work. And there also to highlight what has been said in the very beginning by Leymah Gbowee, the importance of self-care in all of that. So maybe just to round it up, I really would like to pick like two main conclusions that you can also find in the booklet that has been mentioned several times, and that we all hope that you will look at it and make use of. And that is that I think it has become very clear that care work, the care economy, is a totally essential contribution to peace and security, and that this part needs to be considered systematically and central stage in peace building and international cooperation in general. There have been so many statements supporting that, that we really want to emphasize this as one of our main and central conclusions. And the second one that has accompanied us throughout the whole conference is that question of foreign and domestic policies and engagement, and the question of how global North and global South interact and are related. And so here really also that notion of taking peace building not just as a foreign policy issue, but really based on that notion of positive peace or feminist peace, as we have been hearing today, to also support domestic implementation of the women, peace and security agenda, tackling all these different aspects that we heard, care economy, inclusion of migrants, etc. So we would like to urge both state and civil society actors present here to take those conclusions with you, to strengthen care within the WPS agenda, and to encourage you to make use of the leaflet to spread that message. And please watch out for the policy brief that we're going to publish based on that conference as well, and on the work that has been done to get here, which will be published early 22. And of course, from our side, we hope that some of this will be echoed in the next Swiss National Action Plan and in other policy frameworks beyond that. We will keep on engaging and insisting on these issues related to women, peace and security and gender equality. We will also analyze and critically discuss the potential, but maybe also the pitfalls or the risks of this kind of collaboration, right? We will have to be also self-critical. We also heard that before. We need to ask questions about constructive involvement, about independence, impact, resources, limitations. So there is a lot to think about from that almost 4-year process right now. However, to me, it is quite clear that we will stick to what we state ourselves, that we will try to keep open minds and to extend our practice, to extend our instruments and methods, and to be ready to promote new networks and collaborations, to promote that struggle for peace and women's rights and gender equality from here forward. So thanks so much for staying on, and I wish you all the best, and I hope to meet again in another space. Thank you so much.
Dabei sein.